My name is Alexandra McQueenie. This is my audience, and I'm about to give you my cultural informative speech. Here we go. Okay, so the ancient Mayans are a culture well known for their practice of human sacrifice. And because of the uncommon and brutish nature of this, they are often ridiculed because of that. But could you just imagine for a second living in a culture where human sacrifice is not only supported and done, but also encouraged? Could you imagine the constant fear of one day being the person up there on that pyre for no reason? The sense of governmental and religious control over every minute aspect of your life, never knowing if one day they'll simply decide that it was your turn to be sacrificed for the greater good. It's a wonder that people didn't revolt, and I think that that's a question that bugs a lot of historians and anthropologists alike. But I've done a lot of research on this subject, going through studies, theses, looking at universities, and I've found 3 common theories surrounding why these things happened and why people didn't revolt. So the first is that many people think human sacrifice may have been used as a show of governmental power, which makes sense, you know? It's a very powerful thing to do. The second is that it may have been simply an unfortunate misinterpretation of myths, and we'll get to that one later. And the third and most intriguing of them all is the idea that perhaps it's simply a part of the growing pains of creating a new society. Now, let's go back to the first one, the fact that ritual sacrifice may have been used as a show of a government's power. This is pretty evident in the fact that it's a display of dominance, it's a display of power. Karen Wang, a professor at Pennsylvania State University, describes in an article regarding the ancient Mayan ritual that they often featured war criminals above average citizens. So the fact that they're taking criminals who they've taken from war and killing them instead of their own citizens means that they're likely doing it to show their power to their opposing nations. And it's also just an incredible power to be able to pronounce someone dead whether or not they had done anything wrong. Like, just imagine that for a second. It's crazy. However, power couldn't have been the only reason for performing ritual sacrifice, because the sacrifices were ritual. They were only performed during religious ceremonies. Karen Wang also states in the same article, which was last accessed on May 6th, 2020, she describes how during times of great tribulation, the religious leaders would actually go and take slaves and kill them instead. So it still wasn't the citizens, but it was still people part of the society. So that indicates that it wasn't just purely for governmental shows of power. So if that wasn't the case, if it wasn't just political power, the next logical idea is that it was for religious purposes, a misinterpretation of myths, if you will. And this is very obvious because they were rituals, right? They were only performed in the context of special religious ceremonies. Jessica Zaccagnini from the Southern Illinois University describes human sacrifice at the end of the Mayan practice of ball games and says that it was a highly religious affair. And this was in her thesis, which was last accessed on May 6, 2020. Ethan Wartrall, a professor at Michigan State University, also supports this claim by suggesting that sacrifices took place during elaborate ceremonies and may have been depicted on ancient Mayan ceramics, sculptures, and murals. This was in his post on the ancient Mayan ritual, last accessed on May 6, 2020. These religious ceremonies also represented they had a deeper meaning than just the mere brutalization of another person. It's very easily shown in the Mayan ball game. Jessica Giannini states in her thesis, and this is quotes, that the Mayan word for ball, quique, means literally sap or blood. And the significance of blood in the ball game, which implies death, is tremendous, and this interpretation of the connection of blood and the ball correlated with the notion that the ball is synonymous with the human head, it's all very important. They worked, and now this is where the quote ends, they worked together to show this picture of life, this kill or be killed, and it has very little to do with skill and lots to do with luck. And her thesis was last accessed on May 6, 2020. Yet there's still that third reason that ritual human sacrifices may have been performed, and this would explain why the culture was so in on it, not just the religious or governmental powers, but also the everyday citizens. And that is the idea that perhaps it is simply a normal development in society. I know, that's kind of crazy to think, right? Like, apparently killing people is a normal part of development? I think not. But there's actually a lot of evidence to support this. Ethan Wartrell, the guy I mentioned earlier, states in his article, same one as mentioned earlier, he states this, and this is another quote: "It has been a feature of almost all pre-modern societies during their developmental, and for mainly the same reason, to propitiate or fulfill a perceived obligation towards the gods." That's the end of the quote from his post. It was last accessed on May 6, 2020. Karen Wang also supports this by saying that the human sacrifice was practiced in China during the Shang dynasty. So there are multiple cultures that all performed ritual sacrifice for basically the same reason. It's all of these connections give weight and support to this alarming idea that perhaps this is just the way human society works. Perhaps it truly is kill or be killed. So, keeping this shared horror in mind, we must not be hasty to judge the ancient Mayans. They were just like us. Let's remember that the average people are often simply cogs in the machine, led to do terrible acts by their corrupt governments. And let's also take into consideration that people were uneducated and highly religious. We've seen this combination play out before. The Holy Wars in medieval Europe. And whenever this combination happens, it gives a huge amount of weight to the religious leaders, which often become corrupt and use that power for their own gain. It's also highly likely that at least one of your ancestors partook in a human sacrifice at one point or another. So there really is no reason to judge another society for their part in human sacrifice, since your society at one point did it as well. So let's not judge a culture for the mistakes of its past. Instead, let's move forward, keeping in mind all of their mistakes, but leaving the past firmly in the past. Thank you for your time.